Here's a rewritten version of your story, made more engaging while keeping the plot and length intact without line breaks or special characters as you requested. On the morning of August 15, 1893, the Newport Police Department received a frantic telegram that ignited one of the Gilded Age's most disturbing unsolved mysteries. Evangeline Cunningham, a 23-year-old heiress to a railroad empire worth over $40 million, had vanished without a trace from her family's sprawling oceanfront mansion during the most exclusive social gathering of the Newport season. What made her disappearance truly terrifying was not just the circumstances, but what investigators discovered in her private rooms. Hidden inside were detailed photographs of 13 of Newport's most prominent families, marked with strange symbols, a leather-bound journal filled with names, dates, and dollar amounts pointing to a massive network of blackmail and murder, involving some of America's most powerful industrialists and most shocking of all. A stack of forged death certificates signed by 3 different coroners, each one documenting deaths ruled as accidents that showed the same symptoms of arsenic poisoning. For over a century, the Cunningham family has used their wealth and power to bury these discoveries, insisting Evangeline died in a tragic accident abroad. Federal agents who tried to dig deeper soon found themselves blocked by court orders signed by judges tied financially to the very railroad interests Evangeline had been investigating. While local newspaper editors who first seemed interested in exposing the truth abruptly changed their tune after quiet visits from well-dressed men who warned them of the dangers of spreading rumors about such respected citizens. Recently, however, newly uncovered court files and sworn testimonies have revealed a far more sinister story about that August night in 1893. Letters discovered hidden in the walls of a demolished Providence mansion show that Evangeline had been working with a secret network of private detectives, foreign reporters, and even federal operatives who had been documenting what they called the American Conspiracy, a deliberate and organized campaign of murder and corruption that climbed to the highest levels of business and government. Before we continue with the shocking story of Evangeline Cunningham and the secrets that likely cost her life, make sure to subscribe to our channel and tell us in the comments which state or city you are listening from. We love hearing from mystery lovers who help us uncover the truths others want buried. Tonight, we will show evidence suggesting that Evangeline's disappearance was not a single tragedy, but part of a larger chain of eliminations that silenced at least 37 others who threatened to expose the existence of what contemporary documents called the Newport Compact, a secret pact between the richest families in America who divided the nation's wealth among themselves and were willing to kill anyone who stood in their way. Newport, in the summer of 1893, was the undisputed crown jewel of American high society. But beneath the sparkle and glamour lay a world of dangerous secrets, rivalries, and ruthless ambition that would have horrified the public had they known the truth. The quiet Rhode Island coast had transformed from a humble colonial port into a place newspapers called America's Monte Carlo, a playground where railroad barons, steel magnates, and shipping dynasties competed to flaunt their unimaginable fortunes. Bellevue Avenue became a parade of marble palaces disguised as summer cottages, each one more extravagant than the last, their construction claiming the lives of dozens of immigrant laborers whose deaths were barely recorded and never investigated. The making of Newport as a gilded paradise had been carefully shaped by a small circle of families who understood that wealth alone was not enough to protect their power. They needed social control as well. Having learned from the labor riots and political movements of the 1870s and 1880s, these families realized that public opinion could become their greatest threat, so Newport was built to be their fortress, a secluded sanctuary where they could plot their strategies, arrange powerful marriages, and unite against any challenge beyond the eyes of outsiders. The Cunningham family stood among the most powerful of them all. Harrison Cunningham built his fortune through the Baltimore and Newport Railroad, a network that became the backbone of industrial transport in the Northeast, moving coal, steel, and manufactured goods with ease. By 1893, his fortune was estimated at over $40 million worth, more than $1 billion today. But hidden banking records discovered in the 1970s revealed that his true power stretched far beyond that, with shadow corporations worth at least another $20 million tied to Colorado mining interests. Pacific Northwest timber companies and international shipping fleets registered under foreign flags to dodge American labor laws. Here's a rewritten version of your text to make it more engaging, while keeping the same plot and length intact, presented in one continuous paragraph without line breaks or special characters as you requested. The Cunningham estate, known as Windward Hall, stood like a fortress on a 12-acre bluff overlooking the vast Atlantic, with 68 rooms filled with treasures gathered from every corner of Europe. Yet the mansion concealed secrets far more telling than its opulent facade, including a private telegraph office linked directly to railroad dispatch centers, a document vault built to resist dynamite, and a maze of underground tunnels connecting to neighboring estates. All reminders that Newport's summer season was as much about orchestrating powerful conspiracies as it was about pleasure. And at the center of this glittering world was Harrison Cunningham's only daughter, Evangeline, a young woman who had become Newport's brightest star and its most dangerous internal threat. She returned from 3 years at European finishing schools with a mind sharpened far beyond what polite society expected of its young heiresses, fluent in 4 languages, versed in philosophy and literature at the Sorbonne, and, as her wary governess admitted, equipped with an uncomfortably inquisitive intellect. More perilously for her family, she had studied accounting business law and the craft of investigation with professors who never dreamed their pupil would wield such skills against the very foundations of American corporate power. By the age of 23, she had already spurned marriage offers from 2 European counts and the son of a Pennsylvania steel magnate, not for reasons of romance, but because she had uncovered that each had been carefully chosen to secure alliances within the corrupt web upon which her father's empire rested. She learned that the noble suitors were tied to banks that laundered the blood-soaked profits of American industrial disasters, while the steel magnate's son had personally overseen the unsafe mines whose collapses killed more than 40 men. That summer, tensions hung heavy over the Cunningham household, and indeed over all of Newport's elite, as Harrison's health faltered with symptoms eerily similar to other magnates who had begun to question the ruthless methods of the Newport Compact. Whispers about who would control the railroads spread among business partners and rivals alike, for a string of deadly accidents had already removed several obstacles to the family's power. Evangeline, as the sole heir, would inherit everything, but only if she married before her 25th birthday, as stipulated in her grandfather's will. And this looming deadline became the invisible current running beneath every social gathering that season. A deadline that gave her leverage she intended to use. Quietly, she made it known among her father's peers that her willingness to comply with the marriage requirement would depend upon receiving honest answers about the darker corners of the family business. Beyond Newport, the nation was reeling from the panic of 1893. A crushing economic depression triggered that spring. By the collapse of the Philadelphia and Reading Railroad, a disaster that sent banks and businesses tumbling like dominoes. Outwardly, the great houses of Newport seemed untouched, but behind their marble walls, fortunes were crumbling, and several storied families were forced to sell their grand estates while clinging desperately to their public masks of wealth. The truth known only to the inner circle was that this financial catastrophe had been no accident, but a carefully engineered maneuver by the Newport Compact to seize control of vast swaths of American industry, by starving rivals of credit, forcing them into bankruptcy and scooping up their assets for pennies, while their own wealth remained shielded in foreign banks and hidden companies. Against this backdrop of manipulation and barely concealed desperation, Evangeline's inheritance took on a near mythical significance. And the social atmosphere of that summer was charged even further by the presence of European visitors, not there merely for leisure, but as emissaries of foreign banking and industrial powers hoping to claim a share of America's riches. Many of these visitors were astonished at the open cruelty and violent methods that underpinned the empire of American wealth. Count Friedrich von Stauffen, a German banker who moved through these circles, wrote in his diary that Americans spoke of business as if it were competition. But what he saw was closer to medieval warfare fought with modern weapons, a network of feudal lords carving the nation into private kingdoms, defended by tactics that would shock even Europe's most ruthless titans. The Count's observation was sharpened by what he himself had witnessed at a garden party on the Peaton estate, where he observed Theodore Peaton engaged in an intense conversation with a man who seemed to be a federal official, which ended when Peaton thrust a leather briefcase into the man's hands, prompting him to leave without so much as a polite word to the other guests. And when von Stauffen inquired discreetly about the matter, he was told it was nothing unusual, just routine business, not fit for discussion in polite company. Thus, when the evening of August 14th, 1893 arrived, it began like countless other nights in the Newport social calendar. But among those in attendance, there was an unspoken awareness that they were witnessing the final act of a drama that had been building in shadows for many months. Here is your rewritten passage made more vivid and engaging, while keeping the same event structure and length intact, presented in a single flowing paragraph, without line breaks or special characters as you requested. The Cunninghams were hosting their annual Summer's End Ball, a tradition that had become the most coveted invitation of the Newport season, and one that always carried purposes far beyond social pleasure. For behind the music and glitter, it served as a council, where power was brokered. More than 300 guests filled the luminous halls of Windward Hall that night. Not only the elite of American and European society, but a carefully chosen roster of politicians, judges, journalists, and business magnates whose loyalty kept the Newport Compact's grip on American commerce unbroken. The mansion blazed with electric light, still a rare wonder in 1893, a display of wealth and technology that few private residences could match. For the electricity did more than light the chandeliers. It powered a private phone exchange that kept the Cunninghams linked directly to stock exchanges, telegraph offices, and railroad dispatchers across the nation. The terraced gardens rolling down toward the sea were hung with Chinese lanterns that bathed the air in a soft glow, while hidden among them were powerful calcium lights ready to flood the grounds at a moment's notice if danger came. The guest list revealed the true face of Newport society. For present that evening were Senator Marcus Hale of Pennsylvania, whose votes had buried railroad safety laws, Judge Cornelius Weatherby of the Rhode Island Supreme Court, who had quietly erased corporate liability for countless industrial deaths, and Dr. Edmund Sheffield, the state's medical examiner, whose convenient certificates turned workplace killings into acts of God. Also mingling with the crowd were 3 foreign envoys whose governments had been negotiating secret trade agreements that would open global markets in exchange for under-the-table payments. Evangeline made her entrance in a pale blue silk gown, glittering with the legendary Cunningham sapphires, a necklace worth a fortune, but holding a hidden compartment where she carried evidence she intended to use against the compact. Guests later remembered how alive she seemed that night, her laughter bright, but edged with tension, as if she were bracing for a final move. Mrs. Eleanor Sedgwick, wife of a Boston banking titan, and herself a quiet investigator into the railroad's finances, swore she had been pulled aside during the first waltz. When Evangeline whispered urgently that if anything happened to her that night, She must remember seeing her speak with Theodore Peaton at exactly 9:15 near the conservatory. And more importantly, remember the keys she pressed into her hand with instructions for a post office box in Providence, whose combination was her birthday written backward, and to deliver what was inside to the Boston Herald and the New York World without delay. Theodore Peaton, 34 years old, heir to a Pittsburgh steel empire, and one of her most aggressive suitors, was a man whose interest in Evangeline had always been driven by his debts rather than his heart debts that now totaled over $200,000 and were quietly owned by the Compact, which used them as a leash. Throughout the evening, witnesses saw him in tense discussions with Harrison Cunningham. And though no one heard every word, James Weatherby, son of the judge and a junior partner in the railroad business, testified that he overheard Harrison speaking of resorting to more direct means to deal with the Evangeline problem. While Peaton warned of the foreign complications such a move might bring. Complications that stemmed from Evangeline's vast network of European journalists and investigators who were preparing to expose American corporate corruption to the world. Her education abroad had given her ties to reporters from the London Times, Paris Le Figaro, and Berlin Tageblatt, who were already drafting articles that could spark diplomatic crises and even sanctions. And though the Compact had spent fortunes bribing and silencing these efforts, only Evangeline's silence could end the threat entirely. Through the night, she moved with feverish purpose, questioning guests with a precision that felt almost like an interrogation. And many would later confess they felt she was taking their measure. Professor Marcus Aldrich of Yale recalled how she cornered him with exacting questions about recent archaeological methods, particularly the ways ancient texts and objects could be hidden and preserved for centuries in coastal soil and waterproof containers. While Dr. Sheffield, the medical examiner, found himself drawn into what he assumed was idle conversation about forensic science, only to realize too late that Evangeline's pointed inquiries about the longevity of poisons in human remains and the difficulty of distinguishing certain toxins from natural diseases revealed a mastery of the subject far beyond what any society heiress should know. At about 10:30 in the height of the festivities, Evangeline excused herself from the ballroom, saying she needed to fetch a family heirloom from her rooms to show Count von Stauffen, who had expressed interest in the history of American railroads, a seemingly harmless request since the Cunninghams were known for their sudden displays of private treasures. But this would be the last moment anyone saw her alive. Here is a rewritten version of your passage, keeping the same sequence of events. Plot details in length, but enhancing the tension and engagement presented in one continuous paragraph without line breaks or special characters as you requested. What set this moment apart was Evangeline's unusual insistence that no servants accompany her, claiming she wished to select the pieces herself, a decision that went unnoticed by most of the guests who did not realize that her invitation to show Count von Stauffen rare family documents was in fact a coded signal prearranged weeks earlier. The Count was no ordinary visitor, but a representative of powerful European banking houses who had been investigating suspicious irregularities in American railroad financing on behalf of German investors who feared they had been defrauded, and Evangeline had been feeding him evidence in secret. Her mention of retrieving documents was the signal that she was ready to hand over the final cache of records capable of exposing the Newport Compact to European authorities. The last confirmed sighting of Evangeline came at 10:45 p.m., when James Weatherby met her on the grand staircase, descending quickly with a small leather case and a heavy canvas bag in her arms. When he offered to escort her back, she refused, saying with a calm yet urgent tone, "There are some truths that matter more than propriety, James, and some secrets that can no longer be hidden. Your father will soon understand what I mean." Weatherby later swore she seemed not frightened, but fiercely resolute, almost exhilarated. And that she added a strange remark about insurance policies already set in motion and letters sent that afternoon, which would ensure the truth would come out no matter what befell her that night. An hour later, with no sign of her return, her mother Constance sent servants to her rooms, only to find the chambers empty, with signs of hurried packing an open window overlooking the ocean and missing valuables, including jewelry cache. And most importantly, documents from Evangeline's private safe, which had been opened with the correct combination not forced. The room bore marks of a thorough search after her departure, with furniture, shifted hidden compartments pried open and even floorboards carefully lifted and replaced, suggesting that others knew what she had been hiding and had been searching desperately for whatever she had taken. The response to her disappearance revealed the intricate machinery of power in Newport society and how quickly it could be mobilized to control a scandal. Harrison Cunningham's first move was to call in Pinkerton detectives. Rather than rely on local police, a choice that allowed him to bury evidence and keep control over what information reached the public, while also showing how deeply the local authorities were already beholden to corporate masters. The Pinkerton team, led by Captain William Harrington, began by examining her effects and questioning the household staff, only to uncover the double life Evangeline had been living. Hidden compartments in her desk yielded letters to lawyers, bankers, federal agents, and private detectives as far as Chicago, San Francisco, London, and Paris, discussing fraudulent railroad contracts, rigged inspections, systematic bribery of government officials, and even the planned elimination of witnesses who threatened these operations. Harrington, a veteran investigator with 20 years of experience, later wrote privately that her collection of evidence was the most exhaustive and damning proof of institutional corruption he had ever seen, with not just accusations, but authenticated documents, photographs of clandestine meetings, and ledgers that traced bribe money through shell corporations and foreign banks. Among these materials were also detailed notes about the private sins and business crimes of the Newport elite, encoded in a cipher so complex that it took 3 weeks and the expertise of Treasury Department cryptographers to unravel. Those notes chronicled affairs, secret bribes, political manipulations, and a conspiracy among leading railroad companies to fix prices, crush competition, and falsify safety reports. One entry, written just 2 days before she vanished, read, "The Piton contracts are fraudulent. I now hold documents proving that the steel used in the Baltimore Bridge was deliberately substituted with inferior materials for profit. TP personally approved it, knowing failure was certain. The specifications called for grade A steel, but grade C was delivered with falsified certificates, and when engineering consultant Robert Henley discovered the deception, he died in a suspicious hotel fire 3 days after submitting his findings, while his replacement, Dr. Marcus Webb, was paid $50,000 to certify the bad steel as safe. The bridge collapsed 6 months earlier, killing 17 and injuring many more. And though the official cause was said to be an ice storm, Evangeline's papers revealed the disaster was engineered for profit-making. Theodore Piton and others guilty of mass murder masked as corporate negligence. As Harrington's investigation widened, he began to see the same pattern behind countless accidents and sudden deaths, all orbiting the fortunes of Newport's wealthiest families. Here is your rewritten passage, keeping the same plot details and approximate length, but making the narrative more gripping and seamless, presented as a single paragraph without breaks or special characters. In the 5 years leading up to Evangeline's disappearance, no fewer than 18 men and women connected to investigations of railroad safety violations, steel quality fraud, financial irregularities, or labor organizing had died in circumstances that were individually dismissed as tragic accidents, but when viewed together, revealed a deeply unsettling pattern. The most notorious case was that of David Cavendish, a federal railway inspector who had been probing dangerous safety violations on the Baltimore and Newport line just a year and a half earlier. He was found lifeless in a Baltimore hotel room. His death attributed to a sudden heart attack, yet his widow swore that he had recently passed a rigorous medical exam and had been in excellent health. Even more telling, she revealed that he had been receiving a series of threatening letters, and shortly before his death had taken out a substantial life insurance policy confessing that he had uncovered evidence of a conspiracy reaching into the highest levels of business and government. After his death, when she tried to hand over her husband's files to federal officials, the documents mysteriously vanished from their home during the funeral, stolen by someone who left no sign of forced entry. Desperate for answers, she appealed directly to the Cunningham family, only to be visited by two immaculate strangers who introduced themselves as men representing parties determined to prevent the spread of malicious and baseless rumors. Their words were polished, but their meaning was clear. They warned her that her husband's conclusions were misguided and incomplete, and that continuing to pursue accusations against men of reputation could bring about legal ruin for her and those she loved. They hinted darkly that her federal pension as a widow might be lost if his last investigation were officially declared incompetent, and that her own job as a schoolteacher could be jeopardized should stories circulate of her unstable state of mind in the aftermath of her loss. Within a week of that encounter, she received a large anonymous payment and a short note suggesting that it would be wise to abandon her inquiries and move somewhere far from Baltimore, where no one knew her and where the past could be left behind. She complied, relocating to Oregon and never again speaking publicly about her husband's death, but not before secretly passing copies of his remaining notes to her close friend, Michael O'Connor, a reporter at the Baltimore Sun, who vowed to finish what David had started. O'Connor's subsequent investigation into railroad safety became a nightmare of obstruction and intimidation. Requests for documents were met with claims that records had been misfiled or destroyed as part of routine housekeeping, while every federal inspector he sought to interview was suddenly unavailable, transferred to obscure posts, or promoted into positions that cut them off from operational data. Through these efforts, he discovered that the mysterious deaths stretched far beyond the Cavendish case. In just 3 years, 7 federal inspectors had perished in ways that, while individually believable, formed a sequence too consistent to be chance. 3 died of heart attacks, despite clean medical histories. 2 burned to death in hotel fires that conveniently destroyed their evidence. 1 drowned in a suspicious accident that suggested he had been drugged, and another was killed in what appeared to be a random robbery mere days before he was to testify before Congress. Among Evangeline's files, Harrington found the most chilling piece of evidence of all, a single document that at first glance seemed coded, but which she had managed to decipher, revealing itself to be nothing less than a price list for the services of something called the Newport Adjustment Bureau. The entries listed fees for everything from intimidation to permanent removal, accidental resolutions of inconvenient situations, and full-scale reputation management. The scale of payment was as coldly precise as it was damning: $5,000 for simple threats, $10,000 for destruction of evidence, $50,000 for permanent elimination, with all records wiped clean. Tracing this lead, Harrington discovered that the Newport Adjustment Bureau was a real entity with offices in New York, Chicago, and San Francisco that marketed itself as a firm providing discreet consulting services for industrial clients. But by the time he reached the addresses, the doors were locked, the staff gone, and the files purged from every known registry. Then 3 weeks after Evangeline disappeared, Harrington stumbled across something that changed the investigation forever and showed just how wide and deep the conspiracy she had uncovered truly ran. Here is your rewritten passage, keeping all events and facts intact, but making it more intense and engaging presented as a single seamless paragraph with no breaks or special characters as you requested. While examining the grounds of Windward Hall with the patience and precision he had learned during his military service, tracking hidden enemy positions, Harrington noticed a section of soil near the conservatory that looked recently disturbed, the earth slightly looser than the surrounding ground, and showing faint impressions as though it had been tamped down in haste. This spot was not only close to the very place where Evangeline had been seen speaking with Theodore Peaton on the night of her disappearance, but also clearly visible from several of the mansion's windows, a choice of location so exposed that it suggested whoever buried something there had acted with astonishing confidence or under the belief that no one would dare interfere. Using careful excavation techniques that were only just beginning to be adopted in serious criminal investigations, Harrington and his team began to dig. They did not find Evangeline's body, but what they uncovered was perhaps even more dangerous to those responsible: a waterproof metal container wrapped in oiled canvas and sealed with wax resting 4 feet beneath the earth. When opened, the box revealed a treasure trove of evidence, copies of the documents stolen from Evangeline's safe, as well as additional materials, so damning they confirmed her suspicions beyond question. Inside were financial ledgers detailing systematic embezzlement of the Baltimore and Newport Railroad's pension fund, forged inspection reports for a dozen massive construction projects, proof of bribes paid to federal officials, judges and state politicians, and most chilling of all, a set of letters and agreements linking the Newport Compact to European criminal syndicates that specialized in what the papers coldly described as industrial problem resolution. Evangeline's notes made clear that the Newport Compact was not a simple circle of powerful businessmen, but the American branch of an international alliance of dynastic families who had been coordinating their control across borders since the 1870s. Alongside the Cunninghams and the Pembertons, the records named 5 other American families who maintained formal partnerships with similar organizations in England, France, Germany, and even Russia. These links allowed them to launder vast sums of money, conceal assets, order deaths across continents, and manipulate commodity and financial markets with impunity. Among the most terrifying documents was a massive organizational chart laying out the structure of the compact in full, with the 7 American families at the top, each presiding over a specific industry: railroad, steel, coal, shipping, banking, textiles, and agriculture. While beneath them stretched an enormous lattice of subordinate companies, detective agencies, legal firms, medical offices, newspapers, and even several funeral businesses that specialized in discreet body disposal. One particularly horrific section of the archive was labeled by Evangeline as the American Death List, a grim ledger cataloging every individual silenced by the compact since its creation in 1877. Each entry detailed the victim's name, their occupation, what threat they posed, the method of their elimination, and the cost charged for the operation. The list revealed at least 43 killings over 16 years, deaths disguised as accidents, poisonings, mysterious illnesses, and murders dressed up to appear as random crime. These victims were not limited to Americans, but also included European investigators who had been attempting to expose corrupt American practices on behalf of their governments. Among the most shocking of these entries was the record of Congressman William Hayes of Ohio, who had been spearheading a congressional investigation into railroad safety violations before dying suddenly in 1891. His death officially ruled a heart attack, but here coldly documented as a paid elimination ordered and executed by the compact. Here is a rewritten version of your passage, keeping the same plot and length, but making it more vivid and continuous, presented as a single paragraph without line breaks or special characters as you requested. The archive revealed that Congressman Hayes had not died of natural causes at all, but had been deliberately poisoned with a compound designed to mimic heart failure administered during a private dinner at the Union Club in Washington, where several members of the Newport Compact were present. Another entry detailed the fate of Sarah Mitchell, a determined journalist for the Chicago Tribune, who had been uncovering evidence of links between corporate negligence and political corruption until she perished in a hotel fire that consumed both her life and every page of her research. The documents made clear that the blaze was no accident, but had been ignited with a new chemical accelerant that burned so fast and so clean that it erased all trace of arson, while Mitchell herself had been drugged beforehand to make sure she never escaped. Most chilling of all was the discovery of a document that amounted to Evangeline's death warrant, written in the hand of Judge Cornelius Weatherby and countersigned by Theodore Peaton and by Harrison Cunningham himself. Dated 3 days before the ball, it stated bluntly that the EC situation had become untenable, that foreign complications required immediate resolution, and recommended a permanent solution with a budget of $75,000 for complete documentary cleanup. Attached to this order was a detailed plan describing how Evangeline was to be killed using a drug that would mimic a heart attack, after which her body would be taken aboard a private yacht and dumped far out to sea. And the press fed a story that she had eloped with a secret lover to Europe, only to die abroad in a tragic accident. The same plan included provisions for silencing any witnesses with Margaret Flynn to be destroyed by rumors about her mental health and drinking, and Patrick O'Brien to be transferred far away, or if necessary, removed entirely in an accident staged to look like an act of chance. Harrington's discovery of this evidence left him with a terrible choice, because while he now held proof of a conspiracy reaching to the highest levels of American power, he also understood that he had placed his own life in immediate danger. The very files he had unearthed showed how readily the Compact erased federal investigators who got too close, and within days of recovering the archive, he began to feel the pressure. His superiors at Pinkerton suddenly advised him to drop what they called unproductive lines of inquiry and focus on the theory that Evangeline had fled with a lover. When he refused, insisting the evidence proved murder, he was told that the Cunningham family had lodged a formal complaint and demanded his removal. The threats became more personal from that moment. His hotel room was searched while he was away, leaving everything in its place, but his notes clearly examined. Anonymous letters warned that his wife and children back in Chicago would be safer if he ended the investigation and returned home. Even more ominous, he learned that strangers were digging into his finances and personal life, clearly looking for weaknesses they could exploit if he did not bend. Realizing that the walls were closing in Harrington made the only decision that could save him. He copied the most dangerous documents and hid them in safe places with instructions for their release should he come to harm. Then he filed an official report closing the investigation and supporting the official story that Evangeline had run away while vowing to pursue the truth in secret. Working outside official channels, Harrington came to understand that Evangeline's disappearance had not been a single tragedy, but the climax of the largest threat the Compact had ever faced, because she was not only armed with knowledge of their crimes, but had the discipline and intelligence to document them and set up a system of evidence that could survive her death. For at least 1.5 years, she had been organizing a network of allies who shared her mission. Federal investigators who were secretly documenting corruption, foreign journalists who were beyond the reach of domestic intimidation, and even wealthy defectors from within the Compact itself. Among these allies, the most crucial was Dr. Helena Ashford, a physician and reformer, whose own investigation had begun when she noticed how many laborers injured in railroad accidents were treated by the same doctors who seemed more interested in protecting corporations than in healing their patients. Her research revealed that these doctors were paid handsomely to falsify medical records, and that hospitals sometimes buried victims without autopsies, claiming falsely that the families requested immediate burial. In truth, these bodies were being disposed of to hide evidence of negligence or deliberate poisoning. Dr. Ashford documented 37 such cases where deaths were swept away under the same pretext, and when she tried to present her findings to medical authorities, she met a wall of denial, obstruction, and missing records, while letters began to arrive, warning that a lady doctor who dared to meddle in matters beyond her station risked her license, her good name, and perhaps even her life. Here is your rewritten passage, keeping the same events' details and length, but tightening the suspense and flow into one continuous paragraph, with no line breaks or special formatting as you requested. When these escalating threats failed to drive her from the case, Dr. Ashford soon discovered that whisper campaigns were being spread about her professional competence and private morality, designed to discredit her reputation and cut her off from potential allies. Her connection with Evangeline had begun months earlier, when the young heiress came to her under the guise of a wealthy dilettante, with a curiosity about forensic medicine, asking specific questions about detecting poisons in human remains. But Dr. Ashford quickly realized this was no casual interest. Evangeline possessed a level of investigative insight and purpose that made her motives clear. And over the following months, the two women formed a covert partnership, Dr. Ashford offering her medical expertise, while Evangeline brought money, influence, and access to information only she could obtain. Together, they built an investigation more powerful than anything a single investigator could have managed. Cataloging the full scale of the Newport Compact's power with evidence that combined scientific rigor and business records. Ashford's medical skills revealed patterns of suspicious deaths, while Evangeline's connections traced the bribes and false contracts that funded it all. But their success made them exceptionally dangerous to the compact. Pressure on Ashford intensified as colleagues were quietly warned away from her patients, told she was mentally unstable, and hospitals advised that hiring her might cost them their donations. Her home was broken into twice, with nothing stolen except that her files were rifled through. She began receiving anonymous letters detailing her daily routine, and even her medical supplies were tampered with so that one error could poison a patient and destroy her. Faced with these threats, both women refined elaborate measures to safeguard their work. Evangeline setting up safety deposit boxes, foreign contacts, and time disclosures, while Ashford built her own hidden archives and automatic release systems. Their most powerful weapon was what they called the insurance policy, a single document containing not only every crime they had uncovered, but evidence of how the compact suppressed investigations, murdered witnesses, and details of future crimes the group was already planning. It was constructed so that its release would bring not just exposure, but consequences, federal indictments, foreign intervention, and prosecutions impossible to bury. On the night of the summer's end ball, Evangeline carried a copy of this policy inside the leather case James Weatherby saw as she came down the staircase, and her plan was nothing less than to confront the compact. In their own stronghold, demand they admit their crimes, and if they refused, trigger the release of the evidence to newspapers, prosecutors, and foreign governments around the world. What she did not realize was that the compact had already discovered parts of her plan through their own network of spies. They did not know everything, but they knew enough to recognize her as an existential threat and to authorize the order for her elimination. What took place in her chambers that night was not a spur-of-the-moment act, but a carefully orchestrated strike in which Theodore Peaton, Judge Weatherby, and others stationed throughout the mansion moved into position to ensure that no one could interfere. But before that confrontation began, Harrington's later investigation revealed that Evangeline managed to carry out one final defiant act sending coded telegrams to her allies to activate at least part of her insurance plan, triggering a chain of disclosures that even her death could not silence. And just when it seems the tale of Newport cannot grow darker, the events of that night remind us that in a world built on secrets, the truth has a way of clawing itself to the surface. Here is your rewritten version of the passage, keeping all details, structure, and length, while making the flow more gripping and cinematic. It is presented as one continuous paragraph, without line breaks or special characters as you requested. Let us now uncover what happened next in this dark tale of Gilded Age corruption and murder, for the truth of Evangeline Cunningham's final hours only came to light months after the case was officially closed through a convergence of evidence that Captain Harrington painstakingly assembled. The key breakthrough came when Margaret Flynn, Evangeline's loyal maid, finally found the courage to deliver a full and unflinching account of what she had witnessed on the night of August 14th, 1893. Her testimony, supported by physical evidence and documents preserved by Evangeline herself, revealed a brutal and deliberate confrontation that exposed the lengths to which America's wealthiest families would go to shield their empire of crime. According to Flynn, this was no heated argument spiraling out of control, but a carefully planned operation with roles assigned and rehearsed in advance. She recalled seeing strange activity in the mansion that evening, as influential guests moved in and out of Harrison Cunningham's private study, which had been turned into what she later realized was a command post. At 11:15 p.m., not 11:30 as she first claimed Flynn heard voices in Evangeline's rooms, and rather than eavesdropping through the keyhole, she slipped into the network of narrow servant corridors that gave her a clear hidden view. What she saw was not a quarrel, but an interrogation coldly conducted with a single goal to force Evangeline to reveal the location of her evidence and the extent of her disclosure plans. In the room were Theodore Peaton, Judge Cornelius Weatherby, Harrison Cunningham, Dr. Edmund Sheffield, and two men unknown to Flynn who, by their demeanor and methods, were not society figures, but hired enforcers. Judge Weatherby opened the confrontation by presenting a legal document ordering Evangeline to surrender all her evidence and submit to psychiatric confinement, claiming she suffered from delusions. When she refused, Sheffield produced a medical kit and offered what he called a therapeutic treatment that would clear her thoughts. Evangeline stood her ground, showing remarkable courage and a firm knowledge of law and medicine, telling them she knew any confession forced by drugs or intimidation would be worthless in court, and that she had already triggered a network of disclosures that would ensure the truth surfaced, even if she never left that room alive. With that, the mask of civility dropped, and Weatherby began to threaten her, directly describing in detail how the compact had made dozens of inconvenient people vanish without leaving a trace. Peaton added to this by recounting how Congressman Hayes had been silenced in Washington, and how journalist Sarah Mitchell had been eliminated in Chicago. And the stories were so exact in their detail that Flynn realized Peaton himself had helped plan these murders. Yet to their shock, Evangeline remained defiant, telling them she had spent months gathering evidence of those same crimes and had already placed proof with her allies. Then she revealed a devastating secret, that she had documentation of their foreign connections and of their most closely guarded atrocity. The Philadelphia incident, a deliberate train derailment that had killed more than 40 passengers, including a group of European investors who had been investigating their corrupt finances. This disclosure caused a stunned silence, as the interrogators understood she held evidence of an act that could not be buried through domestic bribery because it involved foreign governments. As the silence broke, Sheffield produced a syringe containing a drug he claimed would calm her delusions. But Evangeline had been ready for this, having taken protective substances beforehand and arming herself with objects she could use to fight back. Seeing no alternative, She lunged for the window that concealed the escape route she had carefully planned, installing a rope ladder months before that led down to a small boat hidden among the rocks. Yet the hired criminals had anticipated her move and blocked the way. And in the violent struggle that followed, Evangeline managed a final desperate act, throwing the leather case containing her most damning evidence out the window in hopes it would be carried out to sea or found by her allies waiting offshore. Here is your rewritten version of the passage, preserving all plot points, details, and approximate length, while making the narrative more vivid, fluid, and cinematic, and presenting it as a single, unbroken paragraph, with no special formatting as you requested. Evangeline was finally overcome by the sheer number of her attackers and injected with the drug from Dr. Sheffield's kit, a preparation that did not kill her outright, but left her paralyzed and aware, trapped in a body that could no longer move or speak, forced to hear every word as her captors calmly discussed how they would erase her existence. Judge Weatherby explained with clinical precision that once the drug had taken full effect, they would carry her to a waiting boat hidden in a secluded cove and take her far out to sea, where her weighted body would vanish forever in deep water, making recovery impossible even if the location was discovered. Her belongings would be scattered to create the illusion of a planned escape, and forged papers would tell the story that she had eloped to Europe with a lover and died abroad in an unfortunate accident. But even as she lay paralyzed, Evangeline managed one last act of defiance. Flynn, who never took her eyes off her, saw her press a hidden catch on a ring, releasing a fine chemical powder into the air. It had been designed to cling to skin and fabric for weeks and to produce a faint but persistent scent that would linger for days even after cleaning, ensuring that anyone present that night would carry invisible evidence of their guilt. Then Flynn heard something that proved just how vast this conspiracy really was. As the drugs silenced, Evangeline, Judge Weatherby picked up the private telephone in her room and made a call to a party outside the mansion, reporting in a clipped tone that the primary asset had been secured and the documentation issue contained, and recommending that Phase 2 of the containment protocol proceed while assuring that the international complications would be resolved within 72 hours. The references to the Chicago situation and the London complications told Flynn that other operations were underway at the same time, targeting different people in different cities who also threatened the compact. This murder was not an isolated act, but part of a coordinated purge designed to erase multiple witnesses before they could combine their evidence. In the end, the killing of Evangeline Cunningham revealed not only the scale and sophistication of the compact, but also the brilliance of the countermeasures she had put in place long before that night. Though her body was lost, her evidence survived. 10 days after her disappearance, the first blow struck against the Newport Compact, when packages containing detailed documentation of its crimes arrived simultaneously at the New York World, the Boston Herald, and the Philadelphia Inquirer. Sent from multiple post offices by a network of couriers that she herself had set up, the packages ensured that even if some were intercepted, enough would reach their destinations to guarantee exposure. Inside were copies of the compact's secret files, meticulous analyses prepared by Evangeline with the help of Dr. Ashford and their allies, that explained the links between suspicious deaths, exposed the bribery of judges and officials, and laid out the entire hierarchy of the organization. Most damning of all were her predictions, describing exactly how the compact would react to her disappearance, a roadmap of intimidation, obstruction, and witness elimination that unfolded exactly as she had foreseen, proving to the public that every other claim she made was also true. The revelations unleashed a storm of public outrage that the compact's wealth and power could not fully contain. Newspapers devoted weeks to the scandal. Federal prosecutors were forced to open cases. Congress held hearings, and foreign governments demanded answers when they realized their citizens had been deliberately murdered by American industrialists. Yet even in disgrace, the compact's members remained largely untouched by law, their fortunes and influence insulating them from justice. Harrison Cunningham himself died only 2 weeks after the first stories appeared. The official explanation, a sudden heart attack, though the symptoms and timing suggested poison, and with his death the government's strongest potential witness was silenced forever, leaving behind an empire in ruins, but never fully dismantled. Here is your rewritten version of the passage, preserving all key events' structure and length while making the language more gripping and cinematic, and presenting it as a single continuous paragraph with no line breaks or formatting as you requested. Theodore Peton escaped arrest by fleeing to Argentina only days before federal marshals came for him, using the hidden financial channels and private transportation networks. The Newport Compact had spent years constructing for just such emergencies, and there he lived under an assumed name on a remote estate until his death in 1923. Never setting foot again in the United States, but continuing to coordinate with the remnants of the organization through encrypted letters and complex financial transfers. Judge Weatherby was quietly removed from the bench and retired to a private estate in California, ostensibly for health reasons, but in reality as part of a secret agreement that allowed him to avoid prosecution in exchange for carefully limited testimony that sacrificed lesser associates while protecting the inner circle. Dr. Edmund Sheffield, the state medical examiner, chose death over disgrace found in his office, with a gunshot wound that was ruled a suicide. Though many suspected that someone silenced him before he could talk, after first destroying vast quantities of incriminating medical records that could have exposed decades of cover-ups. Of the 7 families that formed the Newport Compact, only 2 suffered serious legal repercussions, and even then, their punishments amounted to financial penalties and social exile rather than prison, while 3 of the patriarchs died within months. Under suspicious circumstances, the very methods of assassination they had once used on their enemies and the surviving families retreated behind walls of wealth and influence. Their reputations ruined, but their fortunes largely preserved. The true tragedy of the case lay in the systematic eradication of witnesses that followed the revelations for Margaret Flynn, whose testimony had made it possible to piece together Evangeline's fate vanished soon after giving her statement, last seen boarding a Chicago-bound train with a suitcase and a thick envelope of cash, never to be found again, despite intensive searching. Patrick O'Brien, the night watchman who had corroborated her story, was found 3 months later drowned in a mill pond, his death labeled an accident, though he was an experienced swimmer with no reason to be near the water. Dr. Helena Ashford, Evangeline's closest ally, survived longer than most. But in the end, she too was erased, dying in what appeared to be a laboratory accident when she was overcome by chemical fumes, only for investigators to discover that her ventilation system had been deliberately sabotaged by someone with both technical expertise and time to plan. Over the 4 years that followed, at least 15 people who had provided information or assistance connected to the Cunningham investigation died under circumstances so scattered in time and place that no one outside the case noticed the pattern. And yet, out of this campaign of fear came a legacy that the Compact never foresaw, for Evangeline's meticulous methods of gathering, preserving, and distributing evidence became the blueprint for a new era of investigative journalism and federal law enforcement. Her strategies of building networks of reporters and investigators, hiding files across multiple jurisdictions, and anticipating the reactions of the powerful, inspired a generation of muckrakers in the early 20th century who openly credited the Newport Compact expose as the reason they had chosen their calling. The federal government, too, was forced to evolve, developing new investigative bodies with expertise in financial fraud, interstate conspiracies, and political corruption after being humiliated by proof that the compact had thrived for more than 15 years without detection, committing dozens of murders and siphoning millions. Internationally, the scandal led to the creation of treaties designed to prevent American companies from acting with impunity on foreign soil and new cooperative investigative units to watch them closely. The vast Cunningham fortune was ultimately inherited by distant relatives unconnected to the railroad empire, who sold off the business interests and created charitable foundations dedicated to worker safety and industrial accident prevention. A quiet act of restitution for the 17 men who died in the Baltimore Bridge collapse and for the many others who had been victims of greed. Windward Hall, where Evangeline made her final stand, was sold and remade as a luxury hotel. But guests whispered of cold voices in the walls, documents that appeared and vanished, and vivid dreams that told them details of a history they had never known. Business faltered as the haunting reputation grew until a suspicious fire in 1932 destroyed most of the mansion, reducing the site to rubble and erasing what remained of the room where Evangeline had met her fate. And though the coastline was searched for years, the leather case she had hurled from the window during her last act of resistance was never recovered. Here is your rewritten version of the final passage, preserving all plot details and maintaining the same length and structure, but enhancing flow and suspense while presenting it as one continuous paragraph without line breaks or special formatting as requested. Yet persistent rumors claim that the leather case Evangeline hurled from her window that night was in fact recovered by local fishermen, who, recognizing its significance, quietly handed it over to federal agents. According to these whispers, the case contained evidence of corruption even deeper than what was revealed evidence that implicated powerful federal politicians, Supreme Court justices, and a network of international business alliances far more vast than the American operations of the Newport Compact. Some historians argue that this additional material was deliberately suppressed by the government out of fear that its exposure would cause political and economic upheaval on such a scale that it could destabilize the entire nation. By this theory, officials chose to sacrifice the lower-level members of the compact, while shielding those at the highest levels whose downfall would have created a crisis no one could control. The greatest lingering mystery of all concerns the ultimate fate of Evangeline's so-called insurance policy, the comprehensive document that not only documented past crimes but predicted the compact's future actions with astonishing precision. While portions of this document clearly reached journalists and prosecutors, there are signs that entire sections were never made public. Letters from those close to Evangeline reference predictions that never appeared in any publication, suggesting that key parts of her most devastating evidence may still lie hidden, sealed away by those who feared its consequences. In the end, the story of Evangeline Cunningham stands as both a testament to the power of one determined individual and a cautionary tale about the terrible strength of entrenched wealth and privilege. Her mastery of investigative techniques, her skill in building networks, and her genius for safeguarding evidence ensured that she won a victory from beyond the grave, but it also shows how brutally the powerful can strike back. Even though her work exposed the compact and shattered its control, most of the individuals responsible lived out their lives untouched, their fortunes, and comfort preserved. The enduring lesson of the case is that the war between justice and corruption is never truly over. It is a constant struggle demanding unbroken vigilance and the courage of those willing to sacrifice themselves for a greater good. Evangeline's fight changed the future, inspiring reforms in workplace safety, new standards for accountability, and a generation of journalists who carried her methods into the 20th century. But the forces she confronted, the concentration of wealth and power, remained and still remain as a challenge to be faced. Her story is proof that even when corruption buries the truth beneath influence, intimidation and wealth evidence has a way of surviving. The legacy of Evangeline Cunningham endures a haunting reminder that secrets are never truly safe and that a single determined conscience can force history to remember what the powerful would prefer to forget. Do you believe that every secret of this case has been revealed, or is there more still locked away in hidden files waiting to surface? Share what you think became of that missing leather case, and whether conspiracies like the Newport Compact continue to operate unseen today. And if this story has captured your imagination, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and share it with someone who loves the dark mysteries of America's past, because some stories never really end. Thank you all very much for watching my video until the end. I sincerely appreciate it, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.